A black caregiver sang softly to an elderly millionaire, unaware that his arrogant daughter was watching, seeing only the color of his skin. She fired him, citing cultural fit. She thought she was powerful, but she was wrong. The man she dismissed was a hurricane in disguise, armed with proof of her deepest crimes. Get ready for a story about prejudice meeting its match. And if you find this story interesting, comment proud and tell us where you're watching from. I'm sorry, but we have to make some adjustments to your work situation. Supervisor Robert's cold voice cut through the morning air of the luxurious Peton residence like a sharp blade. The family has expressed concerns about, let's say, cultural compatibility. Kesha Williams, 28, stood motionless beside the bed of Mr. Catherine Peton, his patient of 6 months. His hands still held delicately those of the elderly man, who had fallen asleep minutes earlier to the sound of a softly sung lullaby. Cultural compatibility, Kesha repeated, his voice maintaining a calm that surprised even Robert. And what exactly does that mean? Robert adjusted his glasses nervously. Well, they feel that someone with a more suitable profile would be better for Mr. Peton's care. Someone who better understands family traditions. What Robert didn't know was that Kesha had overheard the entire phone conversation the previous morning. Johanna Peton, heir to the family's pharmaceutical empire, had called in a rage after seeing that boy on the security cameras, demanding that they find someone more suitable to care for her father. I understand perfectly, Kesha replied, gently letting go of Mr. Catherine's hand. When do I need to leave? Well, today would be ideal. We already have a replacement arriving this afternoon. Kesha nodded, beginning to gather his few personal belongings. But something in his eyes revealed a disturbing serenity, as if he already knew exactly how this story would end. As he walked down the marble hallway toward the exit, Kesha passed the main library's bookshelf, his fingers discreetly brushed against a specific biography. Johanna Peton, the young visionary of the pharmaceutical business. He had read that book 3 times in the last 6 months. Every page, every interview, every public statement, especially the part where she talked about maintaining the highest ethical standards in her company. What the Peton family had no idea was that this simple caregiver had spent the last few months collecting much more than fond memories of Mr. Catherine. If this story of prejudice disguised as standards has sparked your outrage, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next proved that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake of your life. 3 hours after being fired, Kesha received a message that made his blood boil. Johanna Peton had posted a photo of herself visiting her father on LinkedIn, accompanied by a hypocritical caption about family values and excellent care. I've had to make some difficult changes to my beloved father's care team, she wrote. Sometimes maintaining high standards requires courageous decisions. Family comes first. The comments were a mix of praise from other business people and hearts from admirers. None of them had any idea that those high standards meant firing someone because of the color of their skin. What hurt the most wasn't even the dismissal itself. It was knowing that Mr. Catherine had whispered to him the day before, "Kesha, you remind me of the son I never had. Promise you'll never leave me." Kesha had promised, and now he was broken twice. The promise and his heart. Sitting in his small apartment, he opened his laptop and reviewed the files he had meticulously organized over the past 6 months. Not out of paranoia, but out of experience. At 28, Kesha Williams wasn't just a skilled caregiver. He had a nursing degree from the University of Pittsburgh with a specialization in geriatrics and had worked in elite hospitals before choosing home care. Why would a nurse with such an impeccable resume choose to care for patients in their homes for less pay? The answer lay in the dozens of wealthy families who had tried to get rid of him over the years, always with the same veiled excuses about cultural fit or a better match. Kesha had learned to document everything. Every suspicious conversation was discreetly recorded. Every prejudiced comment was noted with the date and time. Every lie told to the family about his performance carefully countered with concrete evidence. In the Peton's case, he had discovered much more than he had expected. Over the past few months, while singing to Mr. Catherine and organizing his medications, Kesha had noticed disturbing inconsistencies. Unnecessary prescriptions being automatically renewed, expensive medications being wasted in quantities that could feed an entire family, and even stranger, frequent visits from pharmaceutical representatives who talked at length with Johanna about new treatment options for her father. Mr. Catherine didn't need half of those medications. Kesha knew this because he had discreetly reviewed each prescription with his medical background. Some were even counterproductive for someone in his condition. But what really sealed Johanna's fate was the conversation he had accidentally recorded when she thought she was alone in her home office. A phone call where she laughed, describing how she was maximizing the old man's health insurance benefits and how those caregivers don't even realize the whole scheme. Kesha smiled bitterly as he organized the evidence. Johanna Peton, the young visionary of the pharmaceutical business, was using her own father as a guinea pig for a health insurance fraud scheme, inflating costs with unnecessary medications and splitting the profits with a network of doctors and pharmacies. The model daughter was literally poisoning her father with unnecessary medications to make money. Meanwhile, she had fired the only person who truly cared about Mr. Catherine's well-being. All because she couldn't stand seeing a black man taking care of her family with more competence and compassion than she had ever shown. Kesha closed his laptop and walked over to the mirror. For months, he had played the role of the simple, submissive caregiver, allowing Johanna and her team to completely underestimate him. They saw only a black man who needed the job and should be grateful for the opportunity. What they didn't know was that they were dealing with someone who had collected enough evidence to destroy not only Johanna's reputation but her entire company. Every whispered insult, every condescending look, every comment about his suitability had only fueled his determination. For months, they thought they were dealing with a helpless victim. In fact, they were feeding a hurricane that was about to devastate everything around them. What that privileged heir couldn't see was that every act of contempt was signing her own death warrant. And when the storm hit, there would be no shelter safe enough to protect her from the consequences of underestimating someone who should never have been underestimated. The next morning, Johanna Peton woke up feeling victorious. Her LinkedIn post had received over 200 complimentary comments from other executives congratulating her on her strong leadership and tough decisions. She had turned the act of firing a black man into a lesson in business management. Sometimes you have to be tough to maintain excellence, she commented in an impromptu interview for the Visionary Leaders podcast 3 days after Kesha's dismissal. We can't let sentimentality get in the way of providing the best care for those we love. The host, clearly impressed, asked about the rigorous criteria Johanna applied in selecting caregivers. Well, Johanna laughed, adjusting her expensive tie. You have to have certain standards. It's not just anyone who understands the needs of a family like ours. The interview was shared on the company's social media with a hashtag business leadership. Johanna felt invincible. Meanwhile, Kesha sat in a discreet cafe in the city center across the table from a man Johanna would never have expected to see there. Dr. Patrick Santos, a white-collar crime attorney and one of the most feared federal prosecutors in the country. So, you have recordings of her admitting to insurance fraud? Patrick asked, meticulously reviewing the documents Kesha had organized. Not just admitting, Kesha replied, connecting his cell phone to a small speaker. She laughs. She literally laughs as she describes how she's maximizing the benefits of her own father's condition. Johanna's voice echoed through the cafe. That old man doesn't even realize how much medication he's taking. Insurance pays for everything, and there's a nice commission left over to split with the doctors in the network. It's a perfect scheme. He gets premium care and I get the benefits. Patrick stopped drinking his coffee. My God. She's literally poisoning her own father for money. Exactly. And when I subtly questioned some unnecessary medications, she increased the doses. She said I didn't have the proper training to question medical treatments. Kesha smiled bitterly. She didn't know I'm a nurse with a specialty in geriatrics. How did you two meet? Asked Patrick, clearly intrigued by Kesha's meticulous preparation. Kesha took a deep breath. My older brother, Jeffrey Santos, worked as an investigator in your office 3 years ago. He died in a car accident last year, but he always talked about how you took down criminals who thought they were above the law. Jeffrey Santos, Patrick mused. He was your brother. He was one of the best investigators I ever worked with. He had an impressive instinct for detecting fraud. He taught me a lot about documenting evidence. He said I might need that skill someday. Kesha opened a neatly organized binder with colored dividers. That's why I spent 6 months gathering evidence before I was fired. I knew that family would eventually show its true colors. Patrick leafed through the documents, copies of medical prescriptions, medication cost spreadsheets, records of unnecessary doctor visits, recordings of conversations between Johanna and pharmaceutical representatives, even discrete photos of suspicious meetings in a home office. "This is a masterpiece of investigation," Patrick murmured. "You have enough evidence to bury not just Johanna, but the entire network of doctors and pharmacies involved." "There's more," said Kesha, opening his laptop. "I found out she's not just a spoiled heir. Johanna is using her father's fraud scheme as a pilot model to expand the business. She plans to apply it to other wealthy patients through a new premium care company she's launching." On the screen appeared internal emails from Johanna's company, detailed business plans to maximize opportunities in geriatric care, and proposals to investors describing how to optimize returns through prolonged treatments. Patrick was speechless. "How did you get access to this?" 6 months of taking care of her house. She saw me as furniture, a black man who didn't understand these things. She left her computer open, talked on the phone in front of me, discussed business as if I were invisible. Kesha smiled coldly. Invisibility can be a powerful weapon when used correctly, and she never suspected. Johanna sees what she wants to see. To her, I was just an uneducated caregiver who should feel privileged to work in her house. She never imagined that a man like me could understand medical terms, insurance laws, or business documents. Patrick began to smile. "You know, this will completely destroy her life, don't you? We're not just talking about civil lawsuits. This is a federal crime. She could get decades in prison." "I know," Kesha replied calmly. "But first, I want her to feel exactly what I felt when I was fired for not being the right fit. I want her to realize that she completely underestimated the wrong person." "And how do you plan to do that?" Kesha opened one last folder. Inside were printed copies of all of Johanna's recent comments and interviews, including excerpts from a podcast interview where she had practically confessed to racial discrimination on national radio. "First, we're going to use her own words to show the world who she really is." Then he pointed to the criminal evidence. "We're going to show what she did to her own father." Patrick held out his hand. "Jeffrey would be proud of you. When do we start?" "We've already started," Kesha replied, shaking the lawyer's hand. "Johanna thinks she's celebrating a victory. In reality, she just signed her own professional death warrant." As they left the cafe, neither person noticed that Johanna's victory was being celebrated prematurely. The arrogant heir had underestimated not only a skilled nurse, but an entire network of people who supported him. For a moment, Johanna had thought that getting rid of Kesha would solve all her problems. What she didn't know was that she had just awakened a hurricane that had been studying her every move for months and now had the legal firepower to turn her arrogance into her most devastating downfall. Johanna Peton woke up the following Monday feeling on top of the world. Her podcast interview had gone viral, earning her invitations to speak at universities and offers of business partnerships. She had turned the firing of a mere caregiver into a masterclass on executive leadership until her phone rang at 7:45 a.m. "Ms. Peton, this is Agent David Walsh of the FBI. I need to talk to you about some irregularities in your pharmaceutical business. Can we talk this morning?" Johanna almost spilled her coffee. "FBI, what are you talking about? There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake, ma'am. We are investigating systematic fraud in the health insurance system. Your name has come up several times in our records." As Johanna stammered, trying to understand what was happening, her assistant, Charles, rushed into her office, his face pale as a sheet. "Ms. Peton, there's something you need to see. It's urgent." He turned on the television to the local news channel. The anchor was talking about an explosive investigation involving fraud in the healthcare system that could reach millions of dollars. Exclusive documents obtained by our station reveal an elaborate scheme in which a pharmaceutical company heir is allegedly using her own elderly father as a guinea pig to inflate drug costs. Johanna's photo appeared on the screen. "Oh my God! she whispered, feeling her legs go weak. How did they get? Charles pointed to the computer. Ma'am, the company website. Look at this. The Peton Pharmaceuticals homepage had been hacked. In place of the elegant logo was a banner that read company run by a criminal. Patients at risk. Below, a video began to play automatically. It was Kesha sitting in a professional studio dressed formally, and with a poise Johanna had never seen before. Confident, articulate, powerful. My name is Kesha Williams. I am a geriatric nurse, and for 6 months I cared for Mr. Catherine Peton, the father of CEO Johanna Peton. What I discovered during that time could save the lives of hundreds of vulnerable elderly people. Johanna felt the blood drain from her face, as Kesha continued with the surgical calm of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months. During my work, I systematically documented how Ms. Peton used her own father as part of a criminal health insurance fraud scheme. Unnecessary medications, fake appointments, prolonged treatments, all to maximize profits at the expense of a defenseless elderly man's health. The screen split, showing Kesha speaking on one side and documents, prescriptions, cost spreadsheets, and audio recordings on the other. Johanna's voice echoed clearly. That old man doesn't even realize how many medications he's taking. Insurance covers everything, and there's a nice commission on top of that. My God, Charles whispered. That's your voice, Miss Peton. Johanna was paralyzed, watching her own destruction being broadcast live across the country. But the worst was yet to come. When I questioned some questionable medical procedures, Kesha continued in the video. Ms. Peton not only ignored my professional concerns, she increased the dangerous dosages. And when that wasn't enough to silence me, she decided to fire me. The screen now showed a recording of Johanna's conversation with her supervisor, Robert, where she demanded to find someone more appropriate to care for her father. The reason for my dismissal? According to Ms. Peton, I wasn't a cultural fit for the family. Translation: I was too black to take care of her father. Johanna's phone exploded with calls. Investors, board members, lawyers, journalists, all wanting explanations she couldn't give. But Kesha wasn't finished yet. What Ms. Peton didn't know is that I have a nursing degree from the University of Pittsburgh with a specialization in geriatrics. I worked in elite hospitals before choosing home care. She saw me as a mere caregiver because she couldn't see beyond the color of my skin. On the screen appeared diplomas, certifications, letters of recommendation from renowned doctors, academic awards, a resume that made Johanna's look mediocre. For 6 months, while you treated me like I was invisible, I documented every crime, every lie, every act of cruelty against your own father. Because unlike you, I understand what it means to care for someone who has trusted me. The video ended with a devastating image. Johanna being arrested live on camera, handcuffed in front of the company that had borne her family's name for 3 generations. The phone rang again. It was the company lawyer, Dr. Patricia Patterson, her voice trembling. Johanna, I need you to come to the office immediately. Search warrants have just arrived. The FBI is confiscating all computers and documents. And there's more. More what? Johanna managed to ask, her voice weak. The federal prosecutor wants a deal. They have enough evidence to seek life imprisonment for systematic fraud, elder abuse, and money laundering. Kesha Williams handed over years of evidence. Johanna, he had everything. Absolutely everything. As Johanna staggered toward her car, Charles shouted from the window, "Ma'am, the media is here." Outside, a crowd of reporters and cameras waited. Microphones were thrust toward her as questions flew from all sides. Is it true that you poisoned your own father for money? How does it feel to be exposed by a man you fired for racism? Will you apologize to male nurse Kesha Williams? Johanna tried to run to her car but tripped over her own feet, falling to her knees on the asphalt. The cameras captured every second of her humiliation. At that very moment, 15 miles away, Kesha was being interviewed live by 3 stations simultaneously. He wore an impeccable navy blazer, his hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and he spoke with the authority of someone who had studied every move of this game for months. "I didn't do this out of revenge," he said calmly, looking directly into the camera. I did it for Mr. Catherine, who deserved real care, not to be used as a source of income. I did it for all the vulnerable elderly people who are victims of schemes like this. And I did it because I believe that competence and character matter more than prejudices disguised as family values. The presenter asked, "How do you feel knowing that your evidence could result in decades in prison for Johanna Peton?" Kesha paused, choosing his words carefully. "I feel like a nurse who has finally managed to protect his patient. Ms. Peton thought she could throw me away like trash because of the color of my skin. She found out she completely underestimated the wrong person." As Johanna was led away in handcuffs, passing a crowd of journalists shouting questions, a single question echoed in her mind. How had a simple black caregiver managed to destroy her empire in a matter of hours? But perhaps the most important question was another. If you had all the power and privilege in the world, but no character or compassion, how long would it take for someone like Kesha Williams to prove that true strength doesn't come from a silver spoon, but from the courage to do what's right regardless of the cost? 6 months after Johanna Peton's spectacular collapse, Kesha Williams sat in his new office on the 22nd floor of a downtown building, watching the movement through the panoramic window. The sign on the door read, "Kesha Williams, RN Director of Quality and Compliance, Mercy Health Systems." His investigation had become a national landmark. The Peton versus Williams case was studied in law schools as a perfect example of how documenting evidence can bring down complex criminal schemes. 3 universities had already offered him full scholarships to complete his master's degree in hospital administration. The phone rang. It was Dr. Patrick Santos, now his personal attorney and close friend. "Kesha, I have news about Johanna," Patrick said, his tone a mixture of satisfaction and justice. "The sentence came down today. 22 years in federal prison plus $15 million in fines and restitution. Peton Pharmaceuticals was sold to pay off the debts. She lost absolutely everything." Kesha closed his eyes for a moment. "And Mr. Catherine?" he asked. "He's fine. Without those unnecessary medications, he has regained mobility and lucidity that doctors thought were lost forever. He's living in a first-rate nursing home, paid for with the money recovered from the scheme, and he's been asking about you." "I'm going to visit him tomorrow," Kesha replied, smiling for the first time in months. Later, Kesha drove to the federal prison where Johanna was serving her sentence. Not to gloat, but to close a chapter. She appeared on the other side of the bulletproof glass, wearing the standard orange uniform with deep dark circles under her eyes and gray hair that hadn't been there 6 months earlier. "Why?" was the first thing she asked, her voice hoarse. "Why did you do this? I could have helped you. I could have given you a promotion, a better salary." Kesha studied her for a long moment. "Johanna, you really don't understand, do you? This was never about money or position. It was about dignity. It was about recognizing that competence and character have no color." She lowered her head. I never meant to hurt my father. The money it was just money. But you were hurting him. And when I tried to protect him, you fired me because you couldn't accept that a black man could be more qualified than you to take care of your own family." Johanna remained silent, finally understanding the magnitude of her arrogance. "You know what's ironic?" Kesha continued. "If you had treated me with respect from the beginning, I would have been your biggest ally. I would have helped you take better care of your father, and I never would have found out about your scheme. Your prejudice was literally the cause of your own downfall." As he got up to leave, Johanna muttered, "Can you ever forgive me?" Kesha paused at the door. "Johanna, I forgave you months ago because holding on to anger would give you power over my life that you don't deserve. I'd rather use my energy to build something better." 3 weeks later, Kesha stood on the main stage of the National Nursing Conference, receiving the Advocate of the Year award for his courage in exposing elder neglect and abuse. The audience of more than 3,000 healthcare professionals rose to a 5-minute standing ovation. "When I started out as a caregiver," he said into the microphone, "many people saw me as just a black man who should be grateful for the opportunity. They couldn't see my education, my experience, or my genuine passion for caring for vulnerable people." The audience was completely silent. What Johanna Peton didn't understand is that competence has no color, that character has no social class, and that the person you fire today because of prejudice may be the very person who destroys your life tomorrow, not out of revenge, but out of justice. The applause was deafening. 6 months later, Kesha opened his own consulting firm specializing in compliance and quality for healthcare institutions. In his first year, he earned more than Johanna had earned in her entire career at the family business. His story became an Emmy-nominated Netflix documentary. Mr. Catherine, now 82 and surprisingly lucid, was his first VIP client. Not because he needed special care, but because he wanted to invest his own savings in Kesha's business. "You saved my life in 2 ways," the elderly man said during a visit to Kesha's new office. "First, by protecting me from my own daughter. Then by showing me that there are still people who do the right thing regardless of the cost." Kesha smiled, watching the city bustle by the window. A year ago, he was seen as a mere caregiver who should know his place. Today, he was nationally recognized as one of the leading experts on ethics in healthcare. The best revenge hadn't been destroying Johanna Peton, although that had been a natural consequence of his actions. The best revenge had been proving that true strength doesn't come from inherited privilege or prejudice disguised as standards, but from the courage to do what's right, from competence built through hard work, and from the dignity that no one can take away from you. Johanna tried to humiliate Kesha because of the color of his skin, but she ended up discovering that she had completely underestimated the wrong person. He learned that the best response to prejudice is not anger. It is success so spectacular that it forces even your enemies to recognize your greatness. If the story of courage and justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that sometimes being underestimated is the biggest advantage you can have. Because when we finally show our true strength, the whole world stops to listen.